I want to begin with a question. What does it mean to trust? Not just to believe in something that is abstract, but to trust in another person, in the universe, in God, in life itself. Now, trust is not just a concept, it's a feeling. A deep-rooted conviction that something or someone is reliable, steady, and present. And yet trust can feel so fragile, especially when life doesn't unfold in the way that we expect it to. This week's Torah portion, Parashat Vayera, confronts us with that struggle. Moses, chosen by God to lead the Israelites out of slavery, is drowning in doubt. Pharaoh has rejected his plea to free the people and instead has doubled down on the oppression of our ancestors. And the Israelites, they were furious. Furious with Moses for making their situation worse, and Moses, feeling the full weight of failure, turns to God and says, "Why have you dealt ill with this people? Why did you send me? Ever since I came to Pharaoh to speak your name, he has dealt evil to this people, and you have not delivered them." And it's a moment of raw honesty. Because Moses is wrestling with the same question that arises in all of us when life feels unbearably hard. How do I trust when everything seems to be falling apart? And it's a question that feels particularly urgent in our world right now. Trust on every single level seems to be in short supply. Because political divides have deepened to the point where neighbors and even family members find themselves unable to have civil conversations. And anti-Semitism is rising, emboldened by voices that once hid in the shadows rather than posting on social media. And economic uncertainty leaves millions wondering how they'll pay their bills or provide for their families. And the climate crisis, as we've seen in the last weeks and months, are more alarming by the day, shaking our trust in the very stability of the earth. And if that weren't enough, there's the deep personal pain that so many of us carry. Strained relationships, health challenges, loneliness, and the unrelenting demands of modern life. So in a world that feels increasingly unsteady, where do we find something in which we can trust? And this is where Moses meets us in this week's Torah portion. Because standing before God, he is not just frustrated, he is devastated. He took the first brave step to help, and now everything feels worse. His despair is the despair of anyone who has ever tried to make things better only to feel like you failed. It's the despair of those who look at the news and the state of the world and feel overwhelmed. And it's the despair of those who in their own lives are struggling to see a way forward. God's response to Moses in this moment is not instant reassurance. It's not, "Don't worry, I'll fix things right now." Instead, God says, "I am Adonai. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but by my name Adonai I did not make myself known to them." Makes sense, right? Because at first, the answer feels really cryptic. It feels evasive. But what God is telling Moses is profound. The patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah, they lived with a sense of trust in promises that were not fulfilled in their lifetimes. They didn't see the covenant come to full fruition, but they trusted that it would, even when they could not see it. Their trust, their faith, wasn't in immediate outcomes. It was in the process, in the unfolding of something larger than themselves. And this kind of trust is what our tradition calls emunah. Often translated as faith, emunah is better understood as trustworthiness or reliability. It's not about blind faith in a perfect outcome. It's about finding what is steady, what is reliable, even when everything else feels chaotic. Emunah comes from the same root as oman, an artisan, something whose craft is steady, whose craft is reliable and trustworthy. To live with emunah is to find and cultivate those steady places in a world that feels really shaky. And this isn't easy to do. In fact, it's one of the hardest things that we can do, especially right now. Because how do we cultivate trust when trust has been broken by leaders, by institutions, even by the people closest to us, or even our own actions? How do we trust when we see hatred rising, when we see the effects of climate change, when we experience profound loss? How do we trust when we've been disappointed and betrayed and scared? And emunah doesn't deny the pain. It doesn't deny the realities. It acknowledges the heartbreak of losing a loved one, the anxiety of not knowing how you'll pay the bills, the feeling of being scared because of a diagnosis, or the isolation of feeling like no one truly understands what you are going through. But it also invites us to lean into the strength of others, to allow community, friendship, and even small, kind gestures to anchor us when everything feels so unsteady. Emunah does not ask us to ignore the brokenness of the world or the struggles in our own lives. Instead, it invites us to find what is steady even in the midst of the storm. It's about identifying the people, the practices, the moments of connection that remind us that we are not alone. It's about leaning into the small, trustworthy places when the big picture feels particularly overwhelming. Now, later in the Torah, we see an extraordinary image of emunah, of that faith and that trustworthiness in action. During the battle with Amalek, Moses stands on a hill, raising his hands high and directing the Israelites' hearts and minds and actions and reminding them that their strength and their victory come not from human effort alone, but from their faith in the divine and in each other. But as the battle drags on, Moses' hands become heavy. And recognizing his exhaustion, Aaron and Hur stand beside him, supporting his arms so that they can remain steady. And the Torah describes Moses' hands in this moment as emunah, as steady and faithful. It's a profound image. Moses' steadiness does not come from his own strength alone. It comes from the presence of others who hold him up when he cannot stand or continue to lift his arms on his own. This emunah is not the absence of struggle, but the willingness to let others carry it and help us carry it too. It's about knowing that we are not meant to navigate life's challenges alone. It is why I believe that one of the greatest gifts a community can offer is the reminder that we do not face our struggles alone. just as Rabbi Erdheim talked about before Mishaberach. Because when the pressures of work or relationships or health feel unbearable, community can step in as a steadying force, a place where others can carry the weight with us and remind us that we are held. In a world as fractured as ours, this image of Moses being held up feels particularly resonant. Who are the Aarons and the Hurs in your life? Who holds you up when you feel like you can't keep going? And for whom are you that steady presence? Emunah is not only something that we receive, it's something that we cultivate. Because to live with emunah is to be trustworthy ourselves, to show up reliably, to speak truthfully, to hold others in their moments of need. These small acts of trustworthiness are what rebuild trust in a broken world. Now, this week's Torah portion reminds us that emunah is not about certainty or quick fixes. It's about the slow, deliberate practice of building trust. It's about finding what is steady, even in a world that is unsteady. And it's about remembering that we are not alone, that like Moses, we are held by others and by something greater than ourselves. So if you're looking at the state of the world, or the state of our country, or the state of your own life, and you're feeling particularly overwhelmed, take a moment to pause. Find one thing, just one, that feels steady. Maybe it's the voice of a friend who always listens without judgment. Maybe it's the rhythm of your breath or the feeling of solid ground beneath your feet. Maybe it's the memory of a time when you were held and you were supported. Because these moments of steadiness are emunah in action. They are the threads of trust that we can hold on to even when the fabric of life feels frayed. The emunah is not just about surviving the hard moments. It's about transforming them into a life of flourishing. It's about asking ourselves, what is the one step that I can take right now to be a source of steadiness for myself and for someone else? Maybe it's calling a friend who's been struggling. Maybe it's putting your phone down during dinner so that you can really listen to your partner or to your children. Maybe it's letting your child know that even when the world feels chaotic, your love is constant. You love them infinity plus one. These small acts of trustworthiness, these quiet gestures of faith, are the building blocks of a life lived with emunah, with faith. And that is where we will find hope. Not in the certainty that everything will work out the way that we want, but in the trust that we are not alone in this struggle. And when we show up for each other in this way, when we steady each other's hands like Aaron and Hur did for Moses, we create something sacred. We build a foundation that is stronger than the chaos around us. We remind each other and even the world that there are still places of strength, still people that we can rely on, still moments of connection that will anchor us. So consider, who are the people in your life who need you to steady them? Who is waiting for you to reach out, to show up, to be the reliable presence that reminds them that they are not alone? Who are the Aaron and Hurs that you can lean on when your own arms grow heavy? Emunah is not something that we practice in isolation. It is something that we build together, one moment of trust, one day at a time. I hope that in the week ahead, we may find the courage to notice the threads of trustworthiness in our lives. May we be willing to let others support us when we need it. And may we have the strength to hold steady for those who are struggling to find their footing. Because in those moments, when we catch each other as we fall, when we create a sense of safety for someone else, we are not just practicing emunah. We are transforming the world into a place of trust. Even in the hardest times, that trust, that emunah, can take root and can grow. Shabbat shalom.